Hi guys, and welcome to the second part of the workshop about teaching new words. My name is Anastasia. I've been working as a teacher of English for about 10 years. This is my third year in Skyen corporate department, and recently I've become a premium teacher. I have a vast experience working with different students and of course teaching new words. Today we are going to talk about different aspects of vocabulary and ways of teaching these aspects of vocabulary, also how to select words for deeper practice, and of course how to adapt our box activities for this. So let's start with a very traditional exercise that I'm sure you've all done 1,000 times with your students on Vbox. Look at the exercise where we match words with their definitions, and let's think together. What aspects of word knowledge are already covered in this exercise? In other words, what can this exercise teach our students? You can pause the video here, but I can tell you that not many things are covered in this exercise. All this exercise teaches is the form of the word. Now the student is able to recognize it in a text. We also know definitions, what these words mean, and some of these words have synonyms as definitions. Very often, right after this exercise, our students are given an exercise like this. Here they are supposed to describe these pictures using new vocabulary. So what do you think, guys? Are these aspects enough to perform this exercise right after? And what other aspects do they need to know to be able to do this exercise? You can pause the video here and make some predictions again, but I can tell you that these aspects are definitely not enough. For example, our students don't know how to use these words in context and what these words can describe. Like stunning. Can a building be stunning? Can a girl be stunning? Or a dress, can it be stunning? Or the word clutching. Should it be followed by any preposition? Or should it be followed by an object? We have no information about these things in this exercise. So if you've been to the first part of the webinar, you are already familiar with some aspects that we are going to discuss today. For example, by aspects of vocabulary knowledge, we mean the meaning, the form or spelling, of course pronunciation, parts of speech, collocations, and actually quite a lot of things. So in other words, what we need to know about the word to claim that we know this word is its form, meaning, and use. That's not the end of the list. The list is much longer. And probably some of you are looking at this huge list and thinking, oh my god, how am I supposed to teach all this stuff in one lesson? Good news, guys. It's impossible and it's not necessary. There are so many aspects that we can teach, but it's impossible to teach everything at once, which means that we need to prioritize. So let's talk about how to select aspects of vocabulary to teach. When we decide what exactly we are going to teach our students, we should think about the following things. Are our students going to perceive or produce these words in real life? What aspects of new words are they already familiar with? And what activities can I use to teach new aspects? Let me illustrate now. Look at the word list. Think about one of your students. Maybe a student who you have just had a class with, or the student who you're going to have a class after this webinar, or maybe just some student that you like most, or a student who struggles with vocabulary more than other students. So think about your students and their real life. Don't think about your classes. Are most students going to perceive or produce these words in real life? You can pause the video here and make some predictions, but probably if your students are not some cooks or chefs in fancy restaurants, or if they are not going to travel abroad to attend some cooking courses, most of them are going to perceive these words in in a menu, for example, or when they watch some videos about cooking, maybe when they read some recipes. So what aspects are already familiar to them? I don't know much about your students, but I assume that most of them are already familiar with nouns. Even elementary students can recognize some nouns here, like eggs, rice, bread. And it's obvious that ways of cooking, the adjectives here are going to be unfamiliar for most of them. So the question is, how can we teach them? That's another question, and we're going to discuss it in a moment. But anyway, now we have already narrowed down the search of aspects. We don't need to teach them nouns. We should focus on adjectives here. So guys, speaking about activities, let's look at our Vim box exercises and try to adapt them to teach new aspects. The first aspect we are going to discuss is hyponymy and meronymy. A hyponym is a word whose meaning is included in the meaning of a more general word. What does it mean? For example, let's take the word flower. What flowers do you know? You can pause the video, make some predictions, but most of you will probably say roses, daffodils, chamomiles, and so on. So all these words are hyponyms. A meronymy is a word that means a part of something larger. Let's take the same word, flower. So what parts does every flower have? Pause the video and think about it, but I can tell you that each flower has leaves, petals, stems, and so on. All these words are called meronyms. So how can we teach hyponymy and meronymy, especially using Vim box activities? So the exercise which I'm going to share is called word networks. Let's look at the word list. This screenshot is taken from our upper intermediate course. Maybe some of you have already taught this lesson with your students, but let's think, how likely are most of them to use these words in their everyday life? I really doubt that many, because thank God we don't deal with extreme weather conditions every day. But we need some meaningful practice, otherwise studying these words doesn't make any sense. They will forget these words right after the class. So here comes the exercise which we are going to explore today. So the exercise is called word networks. The topic of these words is extreme weather conditions. Probably our students are not going to use all these words, so we can focus on the words on weather conditions which our students encounter most often in their life. So for most students, probably these weather conditions would be blizzard, thunder, drought, maybe some other ones. And for each of these words, we can ask our students to think about other words or associations that they have with these words. For example, for the word blizzard, some common associations would be snowplows, traffic jams, and snow. And of course, we're going to do the same with thunder and drought. At the end of the activity, you will have a big word network made by the student with their own associations. The instructions here are quite simple. You ask your students to pick 3 weather conditions that are most common or frequent in their place, and think about other words, people, places, things that can be related to them. What is good about this exercise is that now you can ask more meaningful questions about these words, not just abstract questions like, have you ever seen a lightning? Or have you ever seen a tornado? And also, our students now can relate new words immediately to words they already know. Another aspect that we are going to cover is collocations. Why is it important to teach collocations? Do we really need this? What do you think? You can pause the video here and make some predictions, but let me share some. You can pause the video here and think about it, but I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of advantages in teaching collocations. First of all, they promote fluency, because if our students know what words should go together, they spend less time thinking about it. Also, it increases the efficiency of reading and writing, because if they know what words go together, they predict words faster. Also, it may help them compensate for other language issues. For example, if they have problems with accuracy or pronunciation but use words which often go together, I mean collocations, native speakers will understand them anyway. And finally, they simply sound naturally. So how can we teach collocations? Actually, we don't have many exercises on Wimbox for that, but you can use an exercise called collocation grids. So look at the word list. Here we can see many unrelated words. They are not united by any topic, but we again need some meaningful practice because otherwise our students will simply forget them right after the class. First, we should pick some words for deeper practice. For this exercise, they can be journey, eternal, and research. And then you will give your student a word list and ask them to match these words with our target vocabulary. For example, love. Is it journey love, eternal love, or research love? Detailed. Is it detailed journey, detailed eternal, or detailed research? And so on. This exercise is very easy to design. We can use attachments and notes. We attach a whiteboard in attachments and put the word list in notes and then ask our students to match the words in the notes with the new words in the bubbles. Just one thing to take into consideration, make sure that the words which you put in the word list are words familiar to your students. It doesn't make any sense to put unfamiliar words there. We are not playing a guessing game. We just try to make some important associations with words that they already know. Another aspect that we can teach. If you're not sure which words should collocate with each other, you can use a website called freecollocations.com. The link is below. Check it out after the webinar. Another aspect that we are going to discuss is cause and effect. Let's look at the example. Teaching cause and effect is essential because it trains our students to analyze contextual clues, which is a life skill because they can't always rely on the teacher. And also it exploits their knowledge of the world. However, it's not applicable when the context is not well rounded. So let's look at the exercise that we can use here. This is a text about Hannah and Jamie. Our new word here is perfect zone. We don't know exactly what that is, but we can help our student to guess by asking questions about contextual clues. For example, was the music good in the beginning? No, the music was awful. Did the DJ change it? Yes, he did. She asked him to play something else. What about the next song? Was it better? How do we know? Yes, it was better because it was for a beautiful girl. This is how we guess what a perfect zone is. Let's look at one more example. Our key vocabulary here is madly in love. So what contextual clues can you find? You can pause the video now and look through the text, look for contextual clues. If you've already done this, let's check. Okay, these are the clues. So what questions can we ask about them? Pause the video again and ask some questions. Imagine that you are talking to your student. If you've already done this, let's check together. So where did Jamie took Hannah? He took her to a very romantic French restaurant. Was the evening good and why? The evening was good. Why? Because they talked all evening. Did they meet often after the dinner? Yes. How do we know? They saw each other every day. They met in a coffee bar every evening. So we can guess what madly in love is. The next aspect we are going to discuss is spelling. So what are advantages of teaching spelling? Students who have good spelling skills don't have to hide their poor spelling, which results in many positive effects. First of all, they use broader range of words. Secondly, they are not afraid to use new words when they write. And finally, they are ready for experiments with words which are hard to spell. So, how can we teach spelling? Spelling is closely connected to pronunciation. That's why we can focus on spelling through relating spoken forms to written forms. In these words, some vocabulary is really tricky to write. That's why we can ask our students to match words from the word list with their transcription. However, not all students are good at reading transcription, and it doesn't mean that you have to insist on learning. You can simply dictate them. The instructions here are very simple. You ask your students to look at the notes where you should put the transcription, and then you just ask your students to match words from the word list with the phonemic script. If your students are bad at transcription, just dictate them and then check mistakes together. The next aspect we are going to discuss is parts of speech and word formation. Advantages of teaching this are quite obvious, but let's discuss them anyway. So why should we teach parts of speech and word formation? First, it helps them to build their vocabulary faster. Also, it builds confidence in how to use new words in a sentence. And finally, it makes it easier for them to guess meaning and function of unfamiliar but related words in a text. However, there are a few things to consider. Don't try to teach our students everything, for example, all possible words which go with one prefix or one suffix. But even if you decide to give some extra words for practice, make sure that you include some meaningful practice. Look at the exercise that will help you to teach words formation and parts of speech. As most new words that our students encounter appear in the text, we can use the text to ask our students to find words for the following categories, like ask them to find all nouns, all adjectives, verbs, or other forms. You can pause the video here and look for all nouns, adjectives, and words in this text, but I'm going to give you an example of nouns. The next step will be to ask our students to explain what helped them to guess that these words are nouns. And here they are going to explain what suffixes or what word formation patterns help them to identify them. And now you can ask them some meaningful questions based on the words they found. For example, look at the third column here. You can ask them, do you believe that one day people will augment their bodies? Or think about 3 situations when people might feel embarrassment, or something like that. We've already talked about many aspects and exercises that you can use to teach them, but there is one more question that hasn't been answered yet. How to select vocabulary for deeper practice. Our word lists sometimes are really long, and if we focus on each word in this word list, we won't have time for other skills like listening or speaking. That means again that we have to prioritize. Let's imagine the situation that you've just got a new student. His name is Michael. He's a developer in an IT company. His goal is to improve his English for free communication with people at work and in everyday life. Imagine that you've already done needs analysis and you know what course you're going to use. But are all words in this course going to be equally relevant for him? To answer this question, we should think about the following things. The first is called surrender value. Look at the example. Which words from this list are going to be of immediate use for Michael? In other words, which of them is he going to use probably tomorrow in his everyday context? Definitely not all of them. It's hard to say because we don't know much about Michael, but probably just these 3 words are going to be most relevant. So when we speak about surrender value, we speak about words which our students are going to use immediately in their context. And this is exactly what we should focus on. The next thing to consider is frequency. Look at the words. How often is Michael going to encounter them in his everyday life? Which of them are going to be more frequent? You can pause the video here and make your predictions, but I have to tell you that not all words which we think are nice and useful appear to be really frequent in real life. I've checked this information in iWeb Corpus, and these are results which I got. Surprisingly, only 4 of these words are very frequent. As for words steps, fence, and sink, it's really hard to say because in the search, parts of speech were not considered. So, when we talk about frequency, we speak about words which our students are going to encounter more often than other words in different texts. And this is exactly what we should focus on. And you don't have to check frequency every time you teach new words. You can do this only if there is a strong need for this. The last thing that determines our choice of vocabulary for deeper practice is range. Look at the words. They're taken from a lesson about sport and sport competitions. We don't know much about Michael, but what we do know is that he is an IT specialist, not a sportsman. So probably he's not going to use words quarterfinal, sword, or fencing in his everyday life. However, words like discovery, protested, and compete might be useful for him because they can be used not only in sport context. In other words, when we speak about range, we mean different contexts that can be relevant to our students. We can ignore words that are not used in the context that are relevant for them. Now, let's summarize. Look at the word list. Pause the video here and study the word list carefully and think about surrender value, frequency, and range, and try to pick some words for Michael. If you've already done this, let's summarize together. So, which words will help this student understand spoken English within his context? Probably for his context, these words are going to be the most useful. Let's look at the frequency. Which words will he encounter more frequently or more often than other words? I've checked these words in corpus for you, and I can tell you that only these 2 expressions can be encountered more frequently. Finally, which words is he going to use outside this topic? Probably these 2 words. Now we see which words exactly require some deep practice. We can summarize this scheme into a short checklist that you can use to get prepared for your classes and determine which words require deeper practice. You will get the checklist after the webinar. And now let's summarize. Today we started with the thought that knowing a word means knowledge of its aspects, in other words, its form, meaning, and use. When we select aspects of vocabulary to teach, we think about reception versus production. Is my student going to perceive this word or produce this word? When we select vocabulary for deeper practice, we think about surrender value, frequency, and range. We can ignore words which are not really relevant or frequent for our student. Finally, it's impossible to teach everything in one lesson. Instead, we should be selective. We should learn to prioritize. The next step, guys, is to do the pre-workshop test to check yourselves and get prepared for the practical part. See you all in the practical workshop. Have a great day, everyone. Your TTC.